Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Found out today, Joe Biden is a mastermind. Joe Biden is running all of the indictments, all of the investigations, all of the crime. Evidently, Biden, while being Sleepy Joe, while not being able to, finish a sentence, while, being a doddering fool, supposedly, mastermind. According to Jesse Waters over at the F Channel, their evidence suggests, I love this, evidence suggests that Biden's personally doing all this stuff. Now remember, this is also a weird world that we're in when all I see out of the right is how Joe Biden's too old, too weak, too feeble. He's not all there. He's senile. All that, and then there's this. He's a mastermind. He's running the entire persecution of Donald Trump. And you go, wait a second. Explain? Well, don't have to. It's just a matter of throwing stuff out there to get people all worked up, all outraged, all ticked off. And the reason I'm starting with this is had an interesting day today. I had to get my motorcycle inspected, so I spent an entire day sitting around a Harley dealership talking with anybody and everybody who would come through, and some very interesting conversations came out of it. And the theme that I came away with is people are angry at everything. People are upset at everything, and it's this constant outrage, Candy. For instance, you've got the Fox headline, Biden, and I heard this a couple of times, Biden and the family are huddled secretly away from us, to hide from us. What? He's on vacation. Everybody knew he was on vacation. They published this. It's no big secret. But it's all about the conspiracy. It's all about someone's doing something and they're coming after you. For instance, Marjorie Three Names, Marjorie Taylor Greene, evidently today went off on a bizarre rant about angry that Republicans aren't doing an impeachment inquiry. Not that they're not impeaching him, not that they're not impeaching Joe Biden, because she seems to think there's plenty of evidence. No, she just wants an inquiry. And you go, wait a second. If there's all this evidence and you have it all, and there's all of this, same thing with the Jesse Waters thing. If there's all of this evidence, Republicans control the House. This should be no brainer. Should be bring it out, vote, impeach. Should be simple. But it's not. And I love her response. She's angry. We got so much evidence. And she's angry that other Republicans aren't coming on board. And then she goes into this, we're just asking members of Congress, do you think there should be an inquiry about impeachment? It's not saying we want to impeach, right? And you go, wait a second. No, that's exactly what you're doing with an impeachment inquiry. But understand, all of this stuff is not about good governance. It's not about making your lives better. It's not about any of that. It's about constantly keeping people angry, pitted against each other, and at each other's throats. And I sat and I thought about this a good bit today, because we are fed constantly this incredible amount of outrage, Candy. I mean, it's all about making us as angry at our neighbors, and angry at ourselves, angry at our government. It's all about keeping us all ramped up, and not because they think that they're going to make government better. Please spare me. It's because they want to cash in. They want to fleece the flock. This is all about, understand, the right-wing media thinks their viewers are a bunch of rubes who are going to continue to fall for this stuff, because sadly they do. And what I came across today, and this is what is really distressing to me, because I came across a couple people today who, broken, sadly broken. I mean, people my age and a little bit older who are looking, hopeless, of what the future is and what they're going to leave to their children and to the next hopelessness. And it's because of this kind of stuff. There is nothing that the right-wing media puts out. And look, the left does this a bit too, but nowhere is well. And, I started thinking about this today because one gentleman in particular, career military guy, retired on a military pension, you would think has the world by the short hairs. Now has an opportunity to pursue passions. Told me he's a very religious, he's a pastor. There's all these things that you go, very positive stuff, a reason to live, telling me that he's got no reason to live. That like Jonah, he wants to just be taken. And my mind is about to explode because we live in the greatest country in the world, a wealthy country at its wealthiest moment where there are opportunities to pursue passions and all kinds of stuff. And it finally dawned on me that in this hyper information age that we live in, we start to realize how screwed up we are, or how screwed up we perceive our lives to be, because it then, it came to all of this unpacking of the past and all this unpacking of, just all kinds of bad things that happen to people. And I gotta think a lot of this has to do with how we compare ourselves to others. And I go back to my childhood. I grew up in a housing project in the west side of Cleveland. We were dirt poor. Cupboards were empty most months. The end of the month, there was nothing in the refrigerator. There was nothing in the cupboards. But we didn't know how poor we were. I didn't know how broke we were. I didn't know that this isn't how everyone lived, because everyone I knew, this is what they did. This was their lives. This was the reality. So you weren't comparing yourself to these people who are projecting, that life is wonderful and it's all a bed of roses and a bowl of cherries, or however you want to throw that together. You got up, you did your job, you moved forward, you kept moving forward. And my concern is we're in this moment where there's so much information, where there's so much being inundated with messages and inundated with propaganda, that I look at the folks that I talk to today and I'm going, I don't get it. I don't get how we allow ourselves to be pulled down into that kind of despair. And as a society, how do we make sure that we give people opportunity to get back on their feet and move forward? Now, the one person I talked to, a career military guy, lots of military type PTSD, a lot of struggles with that. Things that could, should, and must be dealt with. But there's also got to be a reason for the future. And a hope that things get better. And I go back to our media structure. It's all about what makes us angry. I was looking at Facebook today, and it reminded me that 11 years ago today I posted a meme. It was about union states versus anti-union states. And it simply asked the question, would you want to live in an anti-union state? And it went through, Mississippi and West Virginia and Arkansas, Kentucky, all of the southern states and the anti-union states, and where they are on the poverty list and where they are on the household income list, all in the worst conditions, high poverty rates, low income rates, all kinds of education problems, all kinds of stuff, and I couldn't help but think, over the last 11 years, what have Republicans done in those states, those red states, to make those places better? And all I keep coming back to is the Marjorie Taylor Greens, who were saying, I don't care about my state of Georgia. I want an impeachment inquiry. That's the most important thing. When will we start to demand that our elected leaders, in red states especially, actually do something? That's what I want to hear. How do we pull ourselves out of this? Because I got to tell you, I walked away from a number of conversations today with a bit of despair. So I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, your thoughts. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425. Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So again, I come back to this. How do we pull people back together, especially in a period when you're talking to people who are hyper religious? I mean, that's the weird thing. Religion used to be that thing that pulled us together, that made us better. It's just amazing to me. Let's go to the phones. We got Michael in Chicago on line one. Michael, how you doing?
Doing pretty good. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. What's on your mind?
Okay. I'd like to talk about 17-year-old young people voting in the primary elections in this country in 24 states now and Washington, D.C. Now, most people think that in order to vote in any government election in the United States, you've got to be 18 years old. You've got to be 18.
In the general,
that's the way
yes.
It used to be, but the laws have changed now. In the last 5-10 years, 24 states now allow 17-year-old kids to vote. But here's the catch. The only catch is they could be 17 at the time of the voting, the primary, but they also have to be 18 years old by the general election.
Correct.
If they could be 18 years of age by the general election in November of 2024, they can vote in the general election and in the corresponding primary election, you see. Now, to be honest about it, it varies from state to state and the age of the kids, but only about half or 60% of these 17-year-olds can vote because they got to be 18 years of age before the general election. But that's still thousands of people, thousands of people. And we should take advantage of this law. A lot of people don't know about it. 24 states. Let me mention a few states, battleground states, that have these 17-year-old primary voting laws. Illinois, I'm from Illinois, Maine, Vermont, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Ohio, Indiana, and Colorado. They all have 17-year-old kids voting. Now, I know you're in Pennsylvania, right?
Yeah, Pennsylvania doesn't.
Well, Pennsylvania, no. You got to be 18 years of age to vote in any election in Pennsylvania. Correct. I know that. But it's spreading every year. The most recent addition was Colorado about 2 years ago.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to it.
It's very hard to get liberal laws through the legislatures because of the gerrymandering and the complications. But these laws are on the books. We should take advantage of them. The progressive community should take advantage and get these 17-year-olds voting. I agree. Because I hear rumors, I hear reports that the Republicans, they're using these laws. They're getting their 17-year-old kids voting. And as a matter of fact, many of these states that have passed 17-year-old voting laws are conservative states, like Ohio and Indiana and Nebraska. They're conservative states. Yep. But they have 17-year-old kids voting. But we progressives, we got to do our share and get these young people. So I say parents, grandparents, uncles and aunts, they should get their children and grandchildren and nieces and nephews voting when they're 17, 18, and 19 years old.
Absolutely.
You see, because if you're young and you vote and you start at 17 and 18, you will probably continue to vote for the rest of your life. It'll be a good habit to have.
And I would also advocate, Michael, for parents to, like we've taken our kids since they were old enough to walk. We've taken them to vote with us. They didn't get to vote, but they've gone to vote with us, so that they get into the idea that this is part of being a citizen. This is part of their civic responsibility. And I'm right there with you. Good stuff. Appreciate it. Thanks, Michael.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you very much.
Yep. No, good. Absolutely 100% behind that. Let's go to Steve in Chicago on line 2. Steve, how we doing, buddy?
Fine, thank you. And with regard to the previous caller, I'm a little bit more ambivalent about it. Over the last 20 years, we've done a great deal of research, and we've come to find, as many people are fully aware, that the young brain isn't fully developed until about the mid-20s.
Right.
Now, we obviously didn't know this 50 years ago when we decided to move the voting age from 21 to 18. So, again, I'm a little bit ambivalent about this because, on the one hand, we spend a lot of time discussing how young people's brains aren't fully developed and therefore they're not capable of making certain decisions, and we need to go a little bit easier on them with regard to the criminal justice system and other mistakes that they might make. And I agree with that, but then we can't then talk out of both sides of our mouth and argue that a 17-year-old is just terribly capable of going out and being an informed voter. So, like I say, I'm a little bit more ambivalent about it. On a practical level, I agree. If it's permissible, the other side is going to be doing it, then certainly we need to get our voters out there doing it as well.
Yeah.
But in terms of the health of the democracy, again, a little bit ambivalent about it.
Yeah, and I know young people don't get out to vote in the same numbers as they would as older generations do. As you get older, you tend to vote more often. I know everyone loves to court the young vote, but sorry, they don't get out in the numbers that everyone wishes.
And that's an important point. I mean, when young people got the vote, and coming out of the 1960s, those young people couldn't wait to get the vote. They were involved. They helped to end the Vietnam War, to bring the Nixon presidency to an end. They voted, and then subsequent generations just said, well, I'm glad I got the right, but I don't exercise the franchise very much.
Yeah, I got something else to do on Tuesday.
Yeah, exactly. So, there's a Marvel movie coming out, So, but the reason I called was to address the point that you had originally made, and that is, I think Republicans are looking for a message. I mean, the analogy is, imagine that this country is like a giant ship, and we're heading in the right direction. They were hoping that we weren't going to be heading in the right direction, and they were going to be able to run on that. So now, the ship's headed in a direction that looks pretty good for a lot of people. Okay, well, how can we run on this? Okay, the guy behind the wheel, he's not stable, so that's what we're going to run on. The ship's heading in the right direction, but we can't trust the guy behind the wheel because he's just going to throw the wheel in any direction and crash us into an iceberg.
Right.
That's their sort of ridiculous messaging. But you get a lot of people, as you have pointed out, who are voting against their own interests because of some ridiculous belief system. I'm here in downtown Chicago, cosmopolitan city, a lot of people. I don't know a single transgendered person. I'm for people having transgendered rights, but it doesn't really affect me on a day-to-day basis. Now, what does affect me is I have an elderly mother who is on Medicare, and I was quite interested to find out the 10 drugs that were announced that the government is going to help to lower the cost on, and moving forward is going to be a lot more drugs because we're going to enter into the sort of the modern world, the modern Western world, in which drug companies don't get to charge just whatever they want and what the market will bear in the rest of the civilized world. In America, they do, but not other parts of the world. And that's the kind of issue that people need, because you may never know somebody who's transgendered. All of us are going to get old. All of our parents are going to get old unless they pass away. So think about where your interests lie. And as you alluded to earlier, in terms of the American dream, we've come to a point where we move from you get to retire in your mid 60s and enjoy a decent life with some travel and some stability and a nice home and so forth, and maybe you die, again, reasonable comfort, and you leave your children something. Today we have literally people who don't anticipate ever being able to stop working because there's just no way they're going to be able to make ends meet on Social Security.
Yeah.
And they haven't been able to save anything because, again, wages have been eroding over generations. And forget about saving money and leaving your kids anything, because that day is over. The idea was, okay, dad or granddad bought their first home. They left your father, or the father left the kids a little bit something, chopped up that what was left of the home, and then you could use that to start your first home, or perhaps send your kids to college, or that sort of thing. But now, mom and dad, if they live long enough, they're going to need every cent that they've got in that home in order to stay alive. And in many cases, that's still not going to be enough, and you're going to have to help them as you get older, worrying about how you're going to make ends meet.
Oh, and you got Nikki Haley running around saying 65 is too young to retire. Look, I've had some Republicans tell me that the retirement age should be pushed into the middle 70s, pushing it off to where the vast majority of working people will never get to that end date.
Yeah, and that might be a sort of interesting hypothetical. I come from a background of academia. I hold a doctorate in political science. yes, I would argue that I would be fine with that as a choice. You know, going into my 70s, lecturing several days a week, a few hours here and there. It's not so much fun working in a meat packing factory or being on a construction site when you're 70 years old. Yeah, not the kind of thing you want to be doing.
Yep, no, I'm right there with you. I'm looking down the barrel of that gun myself. But I appreciate the call. Let's appreciate the call, Steve. Thank you. Let's go to Alice on line 3. Alice, what's on your mind today?
Well, I'll tell you exactly what's on my mind. The reason why these people are hopeless is simply because they are force-fed and then literally brainwashed into believing all this nonsense that has no basis in reality. They're told, it's just lies and propaganda that they're hearing. They're hearing it from their Congress people that are in the GOP. They're hearing it from the right-wing minister or pastor. They're hearing it from Fox News. And they're reading it on the Facebook sites.
Yeah, they're inundated with it. And religion used to be this is the weird part for me. But because religion was supposed to be that thing that helped people, be decent. I mean, it doesn't cost you anything to be a decent person, to be nice to your neighbor. It doesn't cost anything to do that. But it just seems like the people who tell me that they're hyper religious, they're youth pastors, whatever. There's an anger there. There's a divisiveness that I got to tell you I'm kind of concerned about.
Absolutely, it's these right-wing, and I'm not going to say all Christians, I call them alt-Christians, is what I call them, because they don't believe in any of the teachings that are in the Bible, and they don't seem to read the Bible, so I'm going to assume they have the Donald Trump Republican version of the Bible instead of the King James. But these religions are pushing this hate and fear against everyone that isn't in their little group. It's terrible.
Yeah. No, it's the other, and I'm like I said today. I had this weird conversation with a guy who told me he was a pastor and gave me his whole life story, and I felt for him because this is somebody who has no drive, no ambition for the future. He seems broken, and it seems there's too many of those people, and I guess I've been struggling with that all day.
Well, yeah, and you see them all the time. I know, in our little rural county here, we have them too. And the bad part is a majority of them will never get any better because they keep listening to the same sources. And their little group that they're with, they all believe the same thing. And there's no getting them out of it. But you have a good evening, Rick.
I appreciate it, Alice. Thanks so much. No, I mean, I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com, because we all know folks like this. And look, I'm fixated on this one person because I believe he's probably a good guy, probably somebody who wants better for not just for himself but for society. Gave of his life and his time to serve our country. I mean, it's frustrating. I want to hear your thoughts, though. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1941. That's the day 2,500 steel workers at the Pressed Steel Car Company near McKees Rock, Pennsylvania, walked off the job. It was the second walkout in 2 weeks. Workers effectively shut down production of armor plate for the Navy, shell forgings for the Army, and railroad cars used to transport military material. The company had gone back on promises of holding a collective bargaining election. Steelworkers Organizing Committee Sub-Regional Director Abe Martin told the Pittsburgh Press that while the union had not called the strike, workers had, quote, walked out themselves because they are fed up with the company's discrimination against them. SWAC had been trying to organize the plant for years, But the company had engineered an election for a so-called independent union 18 months earlier when the complex was only operating at half capacity. Workers walked out at the beginning of the month and ended their strike on the guarantee that negotiations for a new election would begin. But when they returned, they found that some were stripped of their seniority while others were forcefully transferred to new departments. The day before, machine shop workers on the afternoon shift were fed up and dropped their tools. Word spread throughout the evening, and by early morning, picket lines were solid and production had come to a complete standstill. When the company tried to force reopening of the plant after Labor Day, 1,500 workers formed picket lines at the gate to stop scabbing. They returned to work 10 days later in compliance with a request by the National Defense Mediation Board. The NLRB rejected SWAC's election petition 2 months later, but SWAC persisted and won exclusive bargaining rights the following June.
The people are revolting, in the very best meaning of that word. An inspiring example of people rising up against a trifecta of economic, cultural, and political oppression has just come to us from a community of seemingly powerless people living in a very isolated place. Long exploited, lied to, disrespected, and robbed, they revolted, daring to take on the biggest, richest, most politically connected industrial power on the globe, Big Oil. Astonishingly, after a decade of protesting, organizing, coalition building, suing, petitioning, and otherwise resolutely rebelling against injustice, these tenacious people just won an inspiring grassroots victory over Big Oil profiteering. One reason you probably haven't heard about it is that it didn't happen in any of the usual centers of media focus, but in the Amazonian rainforest of Ecuador. Also, this revolt was not led by some brand-name environmental group or charismatic political honcho, but by the Tagari and Taromanani tribes and other indigenous Warani people living in the rich biodiversity of Ecuador's Usani National Park. Directly challenging the exigent crisis of climate change, the Warani rallied the region's young people into a potent political force. They successfully organized behind a national referendum to 1. Ban oil drilling in the region, 2. Compel the profiteers to remove their wells and pipelines, and 3. Pay for remediation and reforestation. Significantly, they specifically called for leaving oil in the ground so it would not add to climate destruction. And the proposed ban was binding, unable to be overturned by future lobbyists and officials. This is Jim Hightower saying a resounding 58% of Ecuadorians said yes. As a Warani leader noted, this is the day the planet started to win.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So we've been talking about, and I've been saying this for months, well, actually well over a year now, that the thing I like about the Biden administration is this move away from neoliberalism, this move away from this trade regime that we've had for almost 30, 40 years now, where, hey, you know what, we're just going to give our jobs away and we'll get cheap stuff. And it comes back to the question I asked yesterday. Which are you first? Are you a worker first or are you a consumer first? And I find, as I've said, I find that depending how you answer that, I can pretty well guess which direction politically people go on that. But for me, I'm a worker first. It's a matter of ensuring that the wages we earn are good enough to support our family, keep a roof over our heads, and get benefits that are going to help give us health security and retirement security, the things that working people need. The consumerism, for me, is a second. But here to share some thoughts on this shift, and if this is a big deal. I mean, is this going to be the direction we go as a country from this point forward, or is this just a blip? So I've asked our good friend Scott Paul to come talk with us. Scott is the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, AmericanManufacturing.org, the website. Scott, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick. Great to be with you.
So I come back to this, and the question, let me ask you, are you a worker first or are you a consumer first?
Yeah. I mean, I think what makes a good consumer is a well-paid worker. And that's the first thing that everybody has to understand. Otherwise, you end up with all sorts of spiraling messes, like we've seen in the past, Rick. So it's about time that someone is taking a worker-centered approach to economic policy. And you talk about this all the time, every day. This isn't limited to trade policy. It's reflected in other aspects of domestic policy, too, that this administration has. But I think that is notable in trade policy, in part, as we've discussed, because of where Joe Biden used to be on these issues and where Trump was, and how it would have been really easy for him in some ways to carry on the kind of national democratic legacy of neoliberalism and to reject everything Trump. But instead, he's pretty much done the opposite. He's rejected the neoliberalism of Clinton and Obama. And he has, I wouldn't say he's embraced the Trump trade policies, but he's carried them through and he's made them his own and he's made them smarter.
Right. And that's where I was going to get to. I mean, there's actually something of a plan here where a lot of what Trump did, especially the tariffs on China, was kind of slapdash. There wasn't a long-term strategy. At least I don't think. You're obviously the expert on this. I don't think there was a long-term strategy on anything Trump did, especially the tariffs that they slapped on. Or do you see that differently?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that you were mostly right. I mean, I think the rationale for the 25% tariffs on some but not all goods coming from China was pretty sound, which was we're losing about some estimates $400, $500, $600 billion a year in intellectual property theft and other sorts of economic drain to China's cheating. And so this is a way to kind of like reciprocate that, to punish China and importers for that. But here's the deal. It's like we are in a global economy, and instead of enlisting allies in any of this, he kind of alienated them. And so it made it very difficult to do that. And then when some global businesses started to complain, he put together what they called a trade deal with China to kind of freeze some of the tariffs, to stop implementing more tariffs. And in some ways, it kind of let China off the hook and reverted to what we've seen in the past. But that said, and he put tariffs on steel and aluminum, and I 100% agree with that. And it stabilized the steel industry. And so instead of bankruptcies, you've had new steel factories, you've had investments in existing ones. Yes, there's been some others that have shut down, but it was for decades, you know this, Rick, it was just steel mill plants shutting down year after year. And now it's stabilized and in fact is growing a little bit. But I think the difference, what Biden has added to this is a sense of strategy, particularly on high-tech products, particularly in enlisting our allies, and how to shape these tariffs to also meet some climate goals too, to isolate China, which is, the largest industrial carbon polluter by far in the world, and doesn't seem willing to do much about it, by the way.
Right.
But I think that's been the smart thing. And I mean, and we can talk about this too. What Trump didn't do, in addition to the tariffs, was invest in our economy. There were big tax breaks for corporations. That was it. That was the beginning and the end of it.
No, I said from the beginning, had he followed what Biden has done, look, had he done at the beginning, and I remember, inauguration day of 2017 saying, if he pursues an infrastructure bill, if he does what he said he was going to do on trade, if he does these things, he'll be reelected down the road without question. He didn't do any of those things. And I find it ironic that the people who believe Trump did all this stuff are saying that Biden isn't, when the opposite is actually true.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And it's like, choose your news from Fox or One America. Well, I don't even know what those networks are called, but yeah, I mean, if you're getting your news from that, you're going to see the world differently than what is really happening. I mean, all you have to do is look at the unemployment rate in like every state, and almost across the board, universally, it's really good news. And a lot of places are hiring. And I was just at a steelworker conference in the South, and I asked folks, there were like 800 steelworkers there from all across the South, the leaders of their local unions, how many local plants were hiring, and way over half the hands went up in the room. And I was like, I tried to think to myself, when is the last time I've seen that in a steelworker audience anywhere?
Yeah.
And the answer I have is never.
Right.
I've never seen that before. And so there's all this widespread hiring in manufacturing. And part of it is because Biden rightly has changed course on trade and has rejected neoliberalism. But part of it, Rick, is what you referenced, is something that Trump didn't do. And that's the infrastructure, which has a Made in America requirement. That's the clean energy manufacturing, which has a Made in America requirement. And that's the semiconductor manufacturing, which also has a Made in America requirement. And so together, that's not only kind of doing, blocking unfair trade practices, but we're actually investing in our future. I'm optimistic about what the outcome of all of this can be.
No, I am too. And look, every time I talk about this, I get people emailing me, busting my shoes over the fact that, well, Joe Biden did all this stuff in the past. And I'm going, yeah, I mean, the consensus in Washington was these free trade agreements were going to liberalize the world. We wouldn't have wars. There was supposed to be all of this payoff and all this benefit. We now look back and go, I know who got paid off. The corporate CEOs and the shareholders, they made out fabulously well. Working people took it on the chin. And thank goodness he's awakened and said, we're going to go in a different direction. That's what I give him credit for. The ability to go, you know what, made some mistakes.
That's right.
We're changing course.
That's right. And here's the thing. I mean, and it's not like Biden was the only one doing this. I mean, this is virtually everybody, by the way, Republican and Democrat. And Trump wasn't a saint either. I mean, his whole production model for his company was to import stuff.
Right.
So he was part of the problem as well. So there are no saints in the past, but to your point is that Biden, I think, read the politics, looked at the policy, and said, we need to make a transformational change. And he turned crisis into opportunity, and really, I think, nailed it about as good as you can. And here's why I know this. Larry Summers, who somehow is hanging around after all these years of giving really bad economic advice to every Democratic president. I can't stand the guy. He's been wrong about everything, by the way, when it comes to globalization or inflation or what have you. But he said, he says he's very alarmed by Biden's manufacturing-centered economic nationalism. And I heard that, and I said, there is no greater endorsement for the fact that Biden's doing the right thing than for Larry Summers to poo-poo it that way. And I'm sorry, his textbook is wrong.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, because when that story broke, I said any day that Larry Summers is upset is a good day.
Yeah. And look, he is a smart guy, but his nose is buried in those orthodox textbooks so much that he can't see the landscape in front of him and what's going on. And that was always the problem, and it still is.
Yes,
and
you're so much more generous than I am. Because I said, look, he's got his head up the greed monster's behind. He doesn't care about working people. He cares about how much money he can put into rich people's pockets. He doesn't care about you or me or anybody else who lost jobs when manufacturing left this country. And he certainly doesn't care about these people who are getting these jobs as they're coming back.
Yeah. Well, what they will say is like, well, we'll do all these trade agreements, and we'll have to do this trade adjustment assistance just to get some votes on it. But it wasn't never a core part of what they believed. But I don't know the answer to this, but I think Biden deserves so much credit, because I don't think Clinton certainly wasn't that, analytical or self-reflective about his policies. He still defends them, by the way. Both China and NAFTA as being great things. took one of my sons down to the Clinton Library, and it had this whole screen about his international economic policies of the 1990s, NAFTA, WTO, China, all this other stuff. And I told my son, I said, I spent the whole decade fighting against this crap, and I was right, and he's wrong. This is complete bullshit. Sorry, but at any rate, it's like but and I'm not sure Obama is necessarily where Biden is on this. So to Biden's great credit, he's been able to break free from that, and there will always be pulls in the other direction from a lot of those folks who are going to whisper in his ear. But I think he understands, both from a political perspective and from a policy perspective now, why it's important to have a worker-centered trade policy rather than one that is based on neoliberalism, letting corporations write the rules, and based on some theory that people don't even completely understand, that goes back 200 years.
We'll see. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show with Scott Paul. Scott's the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, AmericanManufacturing.org, the website if you want to check out their work. So the question that I have on this is, does this stick? Because you've got Trump, who I guess floated another big tariff as, hey, look what I'm going to do. Does this stick? I mean, is this now the new direction, regardless of who is in the White House in 2025?
Yeah. Well, that's right. The center of the debate on trade policy has shifted in both parties, right? And it's and Trump's continuing to shift it among Republicans by proposing like a 10% across the board tariff. And look, I don't know, I am in favor of trade enforcement actions. I think we need to do it strategically. A 10% tariff, I understand why Trump's saying that, because it's easy to understand for people, right? I mean, that's super easy to understand and to explain. And so my hope is this, is that Democrats will have a proactive worker-centered trade policy that says we're going to keep hitting on China, we're going to keep investing in our economy, and when other countries aren't playing by the rules, we're going to keep their products out of our market. And we're also going to continue to strengthen our supply chains. So but he's pushing the debate to, Republicans also are in the position, and some Democrats too, where they want to repeal what was called permanent normal trade relations for China. And I agree with this. I think it's a good idea to do that. But the debate is getting further away from free trade agreements and more towards, a healthy economic nationalism.
Yeah, but again, I go back to, Obama was supposed to be the guy who moved us away from this. I sat 20 feet from Barack Obama when he told me there are going to be no free trade agreements on my watch. No Colombia, no Chorus, no Panama. And we got all of those and the mother of them that he tried to pass with the TPP.
Right.
Again, I sat, 20 feet from him and said, you can trust me. I'm not going to do that. And he went and did it anyway. So, to see Biden actually doing it, I don't care if he says it, to actually the action of doing it, that's what's important to me.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And he has an excellent trade ambassador, Catherine Tai, who worked very closely with Trump's trade ambassador to completely rewrite the North American Free Trade Agreement and to lean in on trade enforcement as well. And so we've had a complete shift, and this is the important thing. It's one thing for a president to say, it's another thing that you have the personnel. And so at least in Catherine Tai, Biden has an excellent personification of the direction of where trade policy ought to be headed in the United States. And that is to his credit too, because it would have been super easy, again, for him to appoint some traditional kind of USTR that comes out of the corporate world and is going to slow walk everything that workers want. Catherine Tai leans in to all of that stuff.
I love a lot of the people. I love a lot of the people he's put into positions, like Kathleen Tai and like Julie Su, if we can get her confirmed. Like Jennifer Abruzzo over at the NLRB. There's a lot of people that are doing really, really good work, and I say it all the time. Those people are the reason I voted for Joe Biden.
There you go. Well, it's it's going to be, Biden has some good stuff to run on. I'm just going to say, and we're nonpartisan at the Alliance for American Manufacturing, but the investments in manufacturing, you can be sure you're going to hear about those on the campaign trail, because that's stuff that people ought to know, that they want to know. But right now, depending on where they get their news, they haven't heard a thing about it.
Yeah, no, we got to keep that up. Scott, as always, I appreciate the time, the information. Looking forward to having you back again next time.
Yeah, look forward to it, Rick. Thanks so much, and because I won't see you till then, happy Labor Day. Thanks for all your work for working people in this country, too.
Appreciate it, Scott. Thanks so much. Our good friend Scott Paul, the Alliance for American Manufacturing. You can check out their website, americanmanufacturing.org. We'll get links out on social media. You can take a look at that. Want to hear your thoughts? Quick break right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people on the talk.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1907. That was the day that became known for the Quebec Bridge disaster in Canada. Workers were building a cantilever bridge over the St. Lawrence River. This was not an easy task. The river was 2 miles wide at its narrowest point. The river was deep, moved quickly, and was icy in the winter. But in the late 1880s, businessmen in Quebec who wanted to keep up trade with Montreal decided the river had to be spanned. The project did not begin for more than a decade due to a lack of funds. Finally, the Canadian government supported the project to improve the nation's railway infrastructure. Theodore Cooper, a respected American bridge designer, was signed on for the project. Despite concerns about the bridge's design, he never visited the site due to illness. 86 men were working on the project that fateful day. Their workday was drawing to a close when the bridge suddenly collapsed. 75 men plunged to their deaths. Some of their bodies were never found. The bridge collapsed because of design flaws. The official report of the disaster noted that the loss of life, quote, might have been prevented by the exercise of better judgment on the part of those in responsible charge of the work for the Quebec Bridge and Railway Company and the Phoenix Bridge Company. Unfortunately, it was not the last tragedy trying to cross the St. Lawrence. After the bridge collapsed, the Canadian government took over the project. A partial collapse on that effort killed 13 more workers in 1916. The bridge finally opened in 1917. Its completion came at a high price, costing $22 million and 86 lives. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
The steal of Bidenism this is a big freaking deal, and Scott's right. I mean, the reality is Biden is not getting the credit that he has earned on this, because this could have been undo the tariffs, do what the left reactionaries wanted. Trump did it; it must be bad. And this is the weird spot in our politics where we are, because I've had people who they always love to throw me a zinger. Oh, name something you like about this other candidate, and I can say there are things about anybody that you go, well, I can see why this is something that would make them a good leader. Policy-wise, I don't agree with them, but on the Trump front, he did have his finger on the pulse of the working class of this country. People who, in towns across this great nation, feel left behind, feel abandoned, feel unheard. And when he said, look, the game is rigged against working people, we've been saying that for years. I've been saying that for years. So when he said that, everyone's like, oh my God, there's now some allegiance. Now, again, he didn't do anything to make their lives better. But the fact that he just acknowledged it was enough. Now, for me, what Joe Biden has done is remarkable in our system. Now, you could say, well, it's radical self-interest. The tea leaves are moving in that direction. And partially that's true. When you talk to Republicans now, and you get aside from the red hat, blue hat stuff, when you're talking about corporate America, they're just as mad as everyone else. And there's an opportunity to bring people together on that issue. There is an opportunity to make lives better. This is an opportunity to unite the country, which is why so much money, so much effort, so much time goes into the divisive stuff, which is why corporate America spends so much money advertising on the F channel and all of these offshoots to keep pushing, to steal the George W. Bush frame, to catapult the propaganda, to keep people angry and at each other's throats so that you're not talking about the real stuff that matters, which is finally we have in this country an industrial policy. We haven't had one of those in pretty much my entire lifetime, because we went to this, the invisible hand will take, we believe in a lot of invisible things, and we think a lot of invisible things do a lot of things. It really doesn't. But we were told, no, the invisible hand of the market will do it. No, it's wonderful. And what the invisible hand did was rob us blind. So for me, the fact that Biden has made this shift is important. Now, as I said a minute ago, the reason I voted for Biden is because of the people that he put into positions of power, into those regulatory bodies, into those committee assignments, into those places that, do affect our lives every day. The woman who's the head of the NLRB is fabulous. The woman that's the acting Secretary of Labor is fantastic for working people. The head of the Federal Trade Commission, fantastic for working people. We need more of that. And this is getting out of the puddle of thinking, this inch deep kind of thinking of, well, whatever's on the headline of the day. This is getting into, how does it really affect my life? How does it make things better? The fact that on Monday you had Kamala Harris and the Treasury Secretary with this task force report saying, you know what, we want to encourage unions again, because union workers make a higher wage, they get better benefits. You go down the list. There's a ton of benefits of lives getting better. Because I had this weird back and forth today about, if the economy is so great, why are people struggling? And my answer has always been because union density is too low. If we could get back to 35% union density, much different economy, much different situation for working people. Down to about 6% now. Got a lot of work to do. But this most recent, these announcements coming out of the NLRB, this most recent push by the administration could be helpful. But again, it's all political. And, people say, well, you're a labor guy. Why are you involved in politics? Because everything is politics. Politics decides who gets what. So if you're not getting what you need, if you're not getting name it, healthcare, education, opportunity, infrastructure, whatever that is, transportation, whatever, it's because our politics are failing us. And we have the ability to make those changes. We do. Want to hear your thoughts, though? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back.
We've never had the combination of record warm oceans plus very strong developing El Nino event in recorded history.
Hurricane Hillary makes history as new storms brew in the record hot Atlantic. Panama Canal crippled by severe drought. Plus, Ecuador votes to protect the Amazon rainforest and keep oil in the ground.
Keep it in the ground. All of those stories and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
And it was only a few days ago before we all walked into one of the most significant weather events of our lives, something that makes meteorologists. Many meteorologists can pinpoint an event that was just so off the charts that drew them into this field, and this was Tropical Storm Hillary.
Okay, now we're getting a little pornographic. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, are you as excited about Hurricane Hillary as that guy was?
Well, Hurricane Hillary was a truly historic storm.
Yes, it was.
As we go to air, Southern California is drying out and cleaning up from historic Hurricane Hillary, which spun up fast in the unusually warm Pacific Ocean, rapidly intensified to a powerful Category 4 storm in just 24 hours, making landfall on Mexico's Baja California Peninsula over the weekend before becoming the first tropical storm to hit California since 1939.
And exciting Ariel Cohen of the National Weather Service, apparently.
Yep. Tons of rainfall records broken, especially in mountain and desert areas like Palm Springs Valley, which was hit by nearly a year's worth of rain in a day, overwhelming its stormwater infrastructure. Hillary triggered unprecedented flash floods and mudslides that severely damaged transportation infrastructure across Southern California. But there were no reports of deaths or major injuries in the U.S.,
thus allowing me to have a big laugh at it all, I guess.
AccuWeather released a preliminary estimate of the total economic losses and damages from Tropical Storm Hillary in the western U.S., putting it at $7 to $9 billion.
Okay, less funny.
Climate scientists say man-made climate change turbocharged Hillary's rapid intensification, its historic track into California, and its torrential rainfall impact.
Okay, definitely less funny.
And it's not just Hillary. The sleepy Atlantic hurricane season has suddenly lurched into life with a string of new tropical storms suddenly brewing all at once, which experts say is especially unusual during a developing El Nino in the Pacific Ocean. Climate scientists say record hot water temperatures in the Atlantic are providing fuel to sustain storms as hurricane season reaches its peak in September. Severe drought is backing up the Panama Canal. The drought has caused a drop in water levels in the shipping channel, which is filled by 2 freshwater lakes. Canal operators have reduced loads and crossings this summer, with more than 200 ships on both sides of the canal waiting to pass through. Maritime transportation experts warn such events could become the new normal, with rainfall deficits affecting the ocean shipping industry that moves nearly 80% of global trade.
That as well is going to end up costing billions and billions of dollars, it would seem.
In Canada's historic 2023 wildfire season, firefighters are still battling massive fires that forced the mass evacuation of Yellowknife, the capital of the Northwest Territories, in Canada's worst fire season on record. British Columbia has declared a state of emergency due to the fires. Officials now warn that Canada's fires could last not just through the fall, but into winter. UCLA climate scientist Dr. Daniel Swain on the broadcast said that while scientists accurately predicted the rate of man-made global warming that we're seeing today, they underestimated its impacts on ecosystems and human systems, which are more intense and arriving earlier than expected. And that means society hasn't yet come to terms about what it all actually means for the world we live in.
Given that we're continuing to warm on this roughly linear track, but even if it stays relatively linear, the impacts won't be. And we're starting to see things, the limits of our adaptability already, and it's only going to get harder with additional warming.
But there is some good news. India has approved a $7 billion plan to build and deploy 10,000 new all-electric buses in nearly 200 cities to cut local air pollution and emissions, and officials say they're cheaper to operate. And finally, in Ecuador, in a historic national referendum, Ecuadorians voted overwhelmingly to ban oil drilling in Yasuni National Park in the Amazon rainforest, one of the most diverse biospheres in the world. It's hailed as a historic example of climate democracy, and it was also a victory for indigenous peoples and conservationists.
I will share that hailing. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com.
Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So as we talked on the show yesterday, kind of a big freaking deal going on at the NLRB. This CMEX decision, this announcement, kind of a big deal. Going back to what built the labor movement of my grandparents' generation. You know, I remember them telling me the stories of, look, they march on the boss and said, we've got enough people who want recognition. We demand recognition. We're going to start bargaining. There was no long-term elections. There was no, high-priced law firms coming to harass and intimidate. There were no firings. There was none of that. And if workers didn't get what they want, they shut things down. And you go, well, can we do that again? I don't know whether we're that society, but we could be. And that's why I'm thrilled to see my next guest's article over at the American Prospect. Biden's NLRB brings workers' rights back from the dead, written by the incredible Harold Myerson, who is the editor at large there at the American Prospect. Harold, thanks for taking time for us.
It's great to be here, Rick.
So let's start here. How big of a deal is this?
I would say, like you said, it's a big effing deal. This is probably the most important NLRB ruling in about 70 years because it takes workers' rights back to that period when workers' rights were real and hadn't yet been eroded by bad court decisions and mistakes of earlier NLRB boards. It's a big deal. It could lead to the most serious organizing campaigns we've seen in a very, very long time, and because they have a better chance of winning.
I mean, over the last 70, 80 years, it's been the death of 1,000 paper cuts for the NLRA. This isn't undoing all of that, but this is one of the few times where I think we're going in the right direction.
Yeah, well, the NLRB has a general counsel named Jennifer Abruzzo, who has spent most of her life, coming up in the ranks of the NLRB with detours during Republican administrations to the communication workers and some other unions. And she kind of set a mission as soon as she became the general counsel, telling the 500 NLRB workers who work for the general counsel that, I want you to start citing some labor standards that once prevailed, and we're going to get them back. And there was a decision. She argued a case, as the general counsel does, before the NLRB, and on Friday, the NLRB, I think, delivered really a historic landmark decision.
Now, what does this decision say? What's the?
It says basically this: that if a majority of workers want a union, through signing cards, affiliation cards, or what have you, the employer can do one of two things. He can either recognize the union, which of course never happens voluntarily, or he's obligated to immediately file for a board election. Then part two of the decision, which is really the wowzer, says if the employer commits an unfair labor practice in the run-up to the election or during the election, the union is automatically recognized and the employer is ordered to immediately go into bargaining with the workers. That's close to what the standard was up until 1969, when in a Supreme Court decision that was based on a member of the Richard Nixon's NLRB who misstated the board's position, when that was scrapped. But it basically assumed that the board's position was no longer that.
Right.
That the employer couldn't be ordered to recognize the union and get into bargaining. This new NLRB ruling says yes. If there's an unfair labor practice like firing a worker who's involved in the unionization campaign, which is a very, very common occurrence in modern American labor relations and has been for 40 years. But now the board can order that employer to immediately recognize a union and enter into bargaining.
Right, and this is what
that is a big deal. One other thing that I didn't write in the article, but it's occurred to me since, because unionizing workers became so much more difficult. A lot of unions just kind of gave up. And I remember when John Sweeney ran against the old George Meany, Lane Kirkland regime at the AFL-CIO, he had a study done which showed that unions on the whole spent about 3% of their budgets on organizing. And the reason it was 3% was that after several decades in which, the right to unionize had effectively been negated, they gave up. And the board ruling creates a situation where they can now, I think, gear up and really indeed start organizing.
No, and this goes back to, and I talk about this all the time because I was fortunate enough to be around a lot of older workers when I started, and they told me the stories of the 50s and the 60s and the fights to organize workplaces and how they did it. And they would have never tolerated the kind of abuses that we tolerate now. And we've become accustomed to. Look, firing someone during an organizing campaign is standard practice. And if you're one of these union busting law firms advising these companies, it's almost malpractice not to tell them to fire someone, because there's a massive chilling effect across the organized body, and there's no penalty. Oh, maybe you have to post the dreaded notice to promise to never do it again until you do it the next time.
Right. And it's the most commonly violated law in the United States, because, again, as you just said, there is no effective penalty. Now, there's a new sheriff in town.
Do you think this could move us? Because, I argue that my grandparents' generation were a different breed. They came home from fighting World War II and fascism overseas, and they went to the shop floor to build the most prosperous working class in history, and they did that through organizing. But the laws were better on their sides than they are now. Do you see this as the potential of maybe moving society back into that direction, where even if you weren't a union member, you were still supportive?
Yeah, Rick, I think society is moving in that direction, but the law has been blocking it. We've been seeing every Labor Day the approval rating among the public for unions has been getting up to like 70%. And just today being Wednesday, today
Tuesday.
being Tuesday. Okay. The AFL-CIO released a poll of its own on union approval ratings, which again was in the 70 percentiles. But what struck me was that among Americans who were between the ages of 18 and 29, the union approval rating was 88%. And, I asked the NLRB some time ago for all the votes when all the teaching assistants and research assistants at universities have been voting on whether to form unions. And I added them all up and figured out the percentage. It was 89%. And the poll today said, 18 to 29-year-olds, it's 88%. So this is Generation Union. They know that the economy isn't working for them. They would suffered, the brunt of the very, very, very slow recovery from the 2008, Wall Street panic. And I think the society is ready for this. And for the first time in 70 years, they just got a green light from the NLRB that says, okay, go ahead.
No, this is a big deal. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show. We're with Harold Meyerson. Harold is the editor-at-large at the American Prospect. You can check out their website, prospect.org. We'll get links out on social media how you can take a look at his most recent piece, Biden's NLRB brings workers' rights back from the dead. And I got to tell you, I am thrilled with the Biden administration. I'm thrilled with Jelly Bucket Joe doing the work because, look, I've lived through the Carter years when we were supposed to get rid of Taft-Hartley. I lived through the Clinton years where we were talking about strengthening labor rights in these bad trade agreements and having strike replacement bills that got filibustered. Obama, I shook his hand twice. He told me we're getting something better than the Employee Free Choice Act, and continually come up with nothing. This to me is huge. It's tangible, and it's something that's about darn time.
Absolutely. No, I mean, and when Biden says he's the most pro-union president, I'd say he's the most pro-union president in American history. And he's still got to do more. I mean, there's a whole question of, going to the green economy, how much pressure he can put on companies to make sure that those are union workers and all the new factories that are now beginning to spring up. But he's made some pretty damn good appointments, including at the NLRB, very definitely. And he is committed, and in part, he's sort of close to your grandparents' generation. The downside of his age is a political handicap. The upside is he actually remembers a unionized America, when there was more of a middle class than there is now. And he's doing a lot to try to get it back.
No, and that's a great thing, and something I fully 100% support. But again, I come back to that societal thing that I think is so important. And I think you're right. I think the younger generation, having watched their parents get chewed up and spit out with this economy, and watching jobs being offshored and communities broken, want to take some control of the economy, and I think that is a really good thing. But here's my problem, and I know I'm pitching this as this is a great thing, and you've got it as we're bringing rights back from the dead. There's a flaw here though, because you can have union recognition all you want if it doesn't come down to a contract. If you don't get that book that makes lives better with the wages, hours, conditions all written in it, not much there. Thoughts?
You're absolutely right. Now, the last couple labor law reform bills, which never made it through the Senate, had language in them which said, well, if, there's no contract after whatever it was, 90 days, 180 days, then the government arbitrator will come in and impose a contract, which is, then you put the fear of God into employers who routinely stonewall workers. I mean, that they've done nothing with the 300 or so Starbucks outlets that have gone union, or they've done nothing with the Amazon warehouse in Staten Island, which has gone union. It's not really clear that the board has a legal authority to mandate that kind of arbitration. That may require, again, a labor law reform bill that under some peculiar circumstance finally manages to pass. So that is still a real obstacle. And you're right, Rick, it is a problem. It is a real existing problem right now.
Yeah, but I see this as an opportunity, Harold. This is where the politics of this is so important. I talk to all my union brothers and sisters and say, look, the reason you vote for Joe Biden is this. This is something that is going to make workers' lives better. It's going to make union families' lives better. It's going to expand our ability to increase density, which is going to raise wages and conditions, and lots of snowball effect of good stuff. This is where the politics matter, because we're one administration away from all of this just being wiped away, aren't we?
Oh yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and I think to a lot of people who may be reluctant to vote for Biden, this is a hell of a good case. That this guy's appointees have really delivered, that he's committed, and the only way we're ever going to recreate a middle class here and more broadly shared prosperity is to go down this route, and he's gone farther down that route than any president, maybe since FDR.
Yeah, I'm excited about this. There's going to be good opportunities. You said a second ago, and this is kind of the last line of questioning I have then. You said a second ago that unions had kind of stopped organizing. Do you see now that changing and things being kind of hypercharged? Do you see unions that may not have spent a lot of time and energy trying to organize new places maybe going in that direction?
I do. I mean, the Teamsters already have done a pretty impressive job. And I always thought that there were parts of the contract they won at UPS that would help them with Amazon, like, stopping the camera pointed at the UPS driver, because what workers in America have their every motion, recorded by management? It's Amazon warehouse workers. So, I think they've been trying to tee that up. But yeah, I think that, the new leadership at the UAW looking at all these southern transplant factories and the new battery EV factories that are springing up. Yeah, now, all of, the UAW has gotten nowhere in the South with factories for a very long time. But, the companies that have those factories have been using unfair labor practices up the wazoo routinely every day. Now they can't do that. So yeah, I really foresee an increase in organizing in a lot of unions. I can think of 10, maybe 12 unions that will be gearing up. I hope I'm right. I mean, I could be wrong, but this is the first time it's really rational for them to spend a lot more than they've been spending up to now on organizing campaigns.
No, absolutely. Harold, I appreciate the time. Great article. Hope folks will take a look at it. Biden's NLRB brings workers' rights back from the dead. Written by Harold Meyerson, editor at large there at the American Prospect. Prospect.org, the website. Harold, thanks so much. I appreciate the time.
It's great to be here, Rick. Thank you.
I want to hear your thoughts. Are you as optimistic? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back with your thoughts. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425. Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
I can't emphasize enough how important politically this issue is. 2024, if you're a working person, this is what you're voting for. It's these policies that are going to help recreate that prosperous working class that our grandparents' generation built. And as I've been saying, look, and maybe I'm a little hung up on the societal push, but I remember the stories from the old timers, who were talking about the sit-down strikes, which, by the way, were illegal. And the politicians who could have sent in the National Guard and had them beaten, like they did back in the teens in Chicago, in Colorado during the coal field wars. You had governors who were sending in the militia and the state police that was, basically created to break these strikes. You had politicians during the 30s going, we're not going to do it. Figure it out. The greatest thing that Roosevelt ever did was nothing. He didn't send in the military. He said, we passed a law, figure it out, bargain it out, hammer it out. And when those workers sat down in Michigan, the governor didn't send in the National Guard. He said, figure it out. And that led to an explosion in what we now call the middle class. I call it a prosperous working class. And that generation was a little different. I think my grandparents, and I've told this story a bunch of times in the past, and it's worth repeating. After my mother passed and I moved in with my grandparents, There was somebody who lived in the house caddy corner from my grandparents, and my grandfather was very clear. You do not go over to that house. You don't play with his grandkids. You don't look at you don't deliver a newspaper over there. And, it was one of those things I didn't question. And like 10 years later, probably 15 actually, I said, what was that about? Why was that so important? And turns out the guy crossed a railroad picket 30 years earlier. And it wasn't just my grandfather. It was everybody who had ostracized this guy. He was a scab, and society held him accountable so that nobody else did it. And that's what I'm talking about it being societal. I mean, they came back from World War II and said, look, we're not taking it anymore. We're not going back. And I look at this moment, I'm not comparing COVID to World War II, but that kind of, hey, we're somebody now. Hey, you needed us. Hey, we were important. We're not going back to being nobody. We're not going back to starving. We're not going back to being hungry and homeless and desperate and destitute. We're not doing it. We're going to fight for better, for ourselves, for our children, for the future. That was the mantra. And coming out of the pandemic, same kind of thing, same vibe. We're frontline heroes. We're essential. We're good enough to show up while it's dangerous and bring you your packages, but not good enough to make a living wage. Not good enough to have health care for our kids. Not good enough to have some retirement security for ourselves down the road. This is one of those moments. And I can't emphasize enough politically how important this is. Because understand, if Trump is elected, all this goes away. And we return back to the good old days of it being legal malpractice almost to not fire workers. Now, look, I've done organizing in the past. I've seen what happens to morale in a workforce where the boss fires the top two most ardent supporters, and in a very public way, and for nonsense. And they know they're going to eventually have to hire them back. They know eventually they're going to be found, to have broken the law, but they don't care because the penalties are pathetic. You fire somebody and they go get another job making the same money or more money than they were making working for you. It's a wash. It doesn't cost you anything. Because they know most working people can't last 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years to fight through the process without going and getting a job. So it means that their liability is less, which is why the Employee Free Choice Act tripled that number. That was one of the tenets of the Employee Free Choice Act, where if you fire someone illegally, you pay that person a penalty triple to the salary that they would have earned. So even if they did make the same money, there's still a penalty. Now, nobody believed that was going to be the great stopper of this, but it was something to consider. We don't even have that. This is where, for me, it comes back down to society, and this being a voting issue. This being an incredibly important voting issue. Because wages, hours, conditions, those are important. But it does bring us back to my original question. Which are you first? Are you a working person? Are you a worker? Or are you a consumer? Where is your allegiance? Where are your values? What's more important? I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Maybe I could be off on this. And I want to hear if you think I'm wrong and you think this is bad, by all means, enlighten us. Gonna take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1907. That was the day that became known for the Quebec Bridge disaster in Canada. Workers were building a cantilever bridge over the St. Lawrence River. This was not an easy task. The river was 2 miles wide at its narrowest point. The river was deep, moved quickly, and was icy in the winter. But in the late 1880s, businessmen in Quebec who wanted to keep up trade with Montreal decided the river had to be spanned. The project did not begin for more than a decade due to a lack of funds. Finally, the Canadian government supported the project to improve the nation's railway infrastructure. Theodore Cooper, a respected American bridge designer, was signed on for the project. Despite concerns about the bridge's design, he never visited the site due to illness. 86 men were working on the project that fateful day. Their workday was drawing to a close when the bridge suddenly collapsed. 75 men plunged to their deaths. Some of their bodies were never found. The bridge collapsed because of design flaws. The official report of the disaster noted that the loss of life, quote, might have been prevented by the exercise of better judgment on the part of those in responsible charge of the work for the Quebec Bridge and Railway Company and the Phoenix Bridge Company. Unfortunately, it was not the last tragedy trying to cross the St. Lawrence. After the bridge collapsed, the Canadian government took over the project. A partial collapse on that effort killed 13 more workers in 1916. The bridge finally opened in 1917. Its completion came at a high price, costing $22 million and 86 lives.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
The people are revolting in the very best meaning of that word. An inspiring example of people rising up against a trifecta of economic, cultural, and political oppression has just come to us from a community of seemingly powerless people living in a very isolated place. Long exploited, lied to, disrespected, and robbed, they revolted, daring to take on the biggest, richest, most politically connected industrial power on the globe, Big Oil. Astonishingly, after a decade of protesting, organizing, coalition building, suing, petitioning, and otherwise resolutely rebelling against injustice, these tenacious people just won an inspiring grassroots victory over Big Oil profiteering. One reason you probably haven't heard about it is that it didn't happen in any of the usual centers of media focus, but in the Amazonian rainforest of Ecuador. Also, this revolt was not led by some brand-name environmental group or charismatic political honcho, but by the Tagari and Taromanani tribes and other indigenous Warani people living in the rich biodiversity of Ecuador's Usani National Park. Directly challenging the exigent crisis of climate change, the Warani rallied the region's young people into a potent political force. They successfully organized behind a national referendum to 1. Ban oil drilling in the region, 2. Compel the profiteers to remove their wells and pipelines, and 3. Pay for remediation and reforestation. Significantly, they specifically called for leaving oil in the ground so it would not add to climate destruction. And the proposed ban was binding, unable to be overturned by future lobbyists and officials. This is Jim Hightower saying a resounding 58% of Ecuadorians said yes. As a Warani leader noted, this is the day the planet started to win.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So look, as I've been talking about, pretty much all the last couple of days, this decision by the National Labor Relations Board is a big deal to get people organized, better wages, hours, conditions being a huge part of that. And for me, safety on the job is paramount. And what we know, and look, the Biden folks came out, Kamala Harris and the Treasury Secretary had their big task force report pointing out that union members make 15% more in an industry that unions are involved in, with better health care, better retirement, all the sweeteners. But I would also argue safer. Union environment, safer. Because you have the opportunity to say, no, I'm not going to do dumb things. No, I'm not going to put myself in danger. And as someone who's driven a truck and worked in the freight industry for over 30 years, I'll be the first to tell you, I've never taken an unsafe truck on the road. because I've had the ability to say, no, brakes are an adjustment, fix them. That is empowering. And here to share some thoughts on, this latest decision. Could this help make workplaces safer? That's why I've asked our good friend Jordan Barab to come talk with us. Jordan is a former acting assistant secretary and deputy assistant secretary of labor for OSHA during the Obama years. He also does the Confined Spaces blog, which is, I'm not going to say it's great. I'm not going to say it's incredible, because it's deadly. It talks about all the people who lost their lives. So I don't want to put it up, but it's a really useful resource. And that's why I've asked Jordan to come talk with us. Jordan, thanks for taking time for us.
Happy to be here, Rick.
So let's start with this. I make the argument, we got 35% union density in this country, like my grandparents had. We got safer workplaces. Is that right?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt that being in a union workplace makes the job safer for a variety of reasons. I mean, first of all, as you say, I mean, you can exercise your rights better, and that includes exercising your rights not to do dangerous work, and if necessary, to refuse to do dangerous work. But even before that, I mean, just if you're in a union, you're much more likely to be educated about the hazards that you're facing. You're much more likely to be educated about the rights you have under the law, and again, you're much more able to use those rights without fear of retaliation, and that's the main thing, because that's why workers don't speak up enough, especially vulnerable workers, immigrant workers, low-paid workers who can't afford to lose their job. I mean, they're afraid they're going to be retaliated against. Unfortunately, the law isn't all that strong. I mean, the Occupational Safety and Health Act has anti-retaliation language, but it's not very strong, and the law is 50 years old and not really up to date in terms of protections. So the best protections you can possibly have, to use your health and safety rights without being retaliated against, is to belong to a union.
Yeah, and this is why I think this is a big deal, what the Biden administration is doing. In fact, I think what Biden has been doing, and this administration, on a lot of fronts, the fact that we're talking about heat-related accidents and illnesses, I think that's a huge step in the right direction, finally. But there's a lot of this stuff that I think, that he's on the right side of.
Yeah. I mean, just today, for example, the Biden administration, OSHA, issued a proposal for a regulation that will enable non-union workers to choose their own walk-around representatives. I mean, right now, workers, when they call OSHA, they have a right to name their walk-around representative. But actually, that only mostly applies if you're in a union. And if you're not, and there's no walk-around representative, then OSHA is just supposed to talk to workers. But when we were there during the Obama administration, we had a lot of workers who were, working with industrial hygienists independently, or working with worker rights groups, and they weren't organized. Or sometimes they were in the process of an organizing campaign. They called OSHA and they wanted that workers' right group, or they wanted the union that was helping them organize to be their walk-around representatives. During the Obama administration, we basically clarified that rule to say, yeah, you can do that. Workers, even if they're non-union, can elect their own walk-around representatives when OSHA comes to inspect. That we faced incredible Republican resistance, business resistance, Congress. We eventually had to go back, withdraw it, and then it got killed during the Obama administration. During the Trump administration, and now the Biden administration is going through the full regulatory process, which will make it more or less permanent that every worker, even those that aren't in a union, can choose their walk-around representatives when OSHA comes to inspect.
And why is that a big deal? Why is that important?
Well, it's important because nobody knows the workplace better than workers. Nobody knows the hazards better than workers. And especially if the workers are the ones that file the complaint, they want to be able to show OSHA exactly what's happening and how that workplace normally works. I mean, you find all kinds of situations where OSHA will go to a workplace to look at a certain process, and oh my God, the process is shut down. Well, can somebody tell me how this works? And nobody's there to tell them except for the manager about how things supposedly work. But if you're protected and you have the walk-around representative, you can walk around with the OSHA representative, with the OSHA inspector, and let him or her know exactly what's going on, where the hazards are, where the close calls have been, where the dangerous equipment have been, are, because, OSHA does not, OSHA inspectors don't know every piece of equipment and how every piece of equipment works. They need the workers there to help them, with the inspection, and the walk-around representation is what helps them do that. And now, instead of just being union workers, every worker will have that right to choose their own walk-around representatives.
No, that's a big deal. But for me, this is another one of those moments where this is the reason that you join a union, so that this is another one of those little things that you can't fit on the palm card on why you join a union, but it's another one of those things that you go, yeah, this is why.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And we have, the Occupational Safety and Health Act was passed 50 years ago. Look at the United States 50 years ago. We had, union density was at its peak. Most of the economy was run by manufacturing and construction. And now 50 years later, we have much less union density. Manufacturing, the service sector has really taken over the economy. It's a very different, world out there in the American economy than it was 50 years ago. And OSHA, what we were trying to do during the Obama administration, what they're trying to do now, during the Trump administration, is really bring this 50-year-old law into the 21st century, which is why you have this regulation now.
What they're trying to do in the Biden administration.
Yeah, the Biden administration.
What they tried to kill during the Trump years, because this is one of those things. When people say to me, Jordan, both parties are the same, doesn't matter, they're all corrupt. This is one of those areas where there are stark differences.
Yeah, night and day. Not just OSHA, but wage and hour, NLRB. Everywhere you look, it's very different than these very Republicans in general, but especially the Trump administration.
Because we don't hear about, outside of your blog, you don't hear about workers being killed at work. It's not on the evening news. It doesn't get, any headline space above the fold on the New York Times. These are just people who are, nameless, faceless, and moved along. There doesn't seem to be that kind of, there's a problem, but there is. I think you point out there's 100 people a week?
Yeah, basically 100 people a week are killed in the workplace. That doesn't count. Many times more die of workplace disease. It doesn't get counted as well. But, just in terms of workplace incidents, falling off ladders, getting crushed in machinery, but there are about 100 workers that die every week. And you're right, you don't hear about them. And the reason why is very simple. They die basically one at a time. And, maybe it makes the local newspaper, maybe not. Now I do a list every week. It's called the weekly toll of every incident I can find where a worker is killed on the job. I have 100 Google searches out there, looking at every newspaper in the country, all kinds of different search terms. The sad thing is, there are so many of these, and if you read it, it's really crushing every week to look at all the different ways workers die and all the workers that die in this workplace. The other upsetting thing is I only usually identify about 25 every week. So there's another 75 out there that I can't find, or they don't make the newspapers, and nobody ever hears about them. Nobody hears their names. Nobody hears why they died. Nobody learns any lessons from their deaths. They just kind of disappear. It's just kind of one of those things that nobody notices except their family or their friends or their coworkers.
Isn't this something that I would argue that OSHA should be compiling and putting out? Isn't this something that should be available, data that's being collected so that it can be used, so that we can learn lessons? Because I'm of the mindset that virtually every death is preventable.
Yeah, pretty much. And OSHA, I'm not sure if they still do. I know they had a running line on their website about fatal workplace injuries that ran across the top of the website. I'm not sure if that's still there or not. We started that, and then the Trump administration took it down, and then the Biden administration put it back up again. They don't want to know. They don't want people to know that workers are dying every day on the job. So if they can hide it, then nobody gets concerned about it, and nobody knows about it.
Yeah, but
actually, if you look on the OSHA website, there's a section that says "Remembering Lost Workers," and it has workers' names on there. And if you click on it, it does provide some kind of summary of it. Now these are dated. Obviously, they aren't quite totally up to date. And OSHA also does a list. They require employers to report, to OSHA every fatality, every hospitalization, and every loss of an eye, every amputation. And those are published on OSHA's website. Unfortunately, OSHA's not too well funded, so it usually takes about 6 months for that data to actually come up on the website. But it is there at least.
And that's a problem. I mean, I saw a statistic. It would take like, 150 years to inspect every workplace in the country at the current level of inspectors that we have.
It's actually up to about 190 years now, every 190 years.
I was being generous. I mean, that's just even worse. And it's more than just people dying on the job. It's all of the injuries. It's all of the long-term suffering. It's all of the stuff that comes with that. And this, as we move into this next era of robotics and this next era of being tracked and data points on every step we take, mental health has got to play into some of this as well, I think.
Yeah, probably. And that's something OSHA has a hard time dealing with. I mean, mental health, stress issues, mental health issues that are caused by the workplace. Any kind of health issue OSHA has a hard time with. They do have some standards. Problem is with a lot of health effects, they're hard to track to the workplace. And sometimes they don't, affect people. I mean, especially if you're looking at chemicals or mental health issues, they may not have an effect, until many years after the job. After you finish the job, I mean, they may mostly have an effect when you're home instead of at the workplace. It's very difficult to kind of track that kind of thing. I mean, there's certainly been studies on it, but the law doesn't really, allow OSHA to deal with that kind of stuff very, very well.
And it shows how far behind our laws actually are, because just a minute ago we were talking about Amazon drivers. And there's a lot of workers that are tracked with every step they take. Got the handheld thing that is thing on your wrist telling you what to do every 10 seconds. You're gauging how many boxes you pick up. You got the camera staring you in the face, tracking everything. So every minute of your life is being scrutinized. And I'm concerned that down the road, as this continues, and I think it's only going to get worse, because we're clearly not, without a strong union environment to push back, we're clearly not capable of pushing back on this. I'm concerned that mental health being a big part of this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But you see, I mean, these are the problems. A lot of these problems that you just talked about with the drivers are problems that UPS drivers had, and some of them they were able to address during the recent negotiations, and the threatened strike that they won a great contract, and it did deal with some of those issues, like the cameras, for example.
Yeah. Now, in looking at this, and like I said, on Monday, you had the administration come out and say, hey, look, there's all these better benefits, all this better stuff of being a union member. Friday, you had the decision coming out of the NLRB kind of moving in the direction to get people to join and form unions. Do you have hope that maybe we're going to go in that direction and maybe we can address some of these things?
Yeah, I always have hope, especially if we don't have to go back into the Trump era again. But yeah, I think if we get 4 years or hopefully more than that of a Democratic administration that's pro-union, pro-worker administration, and hopefully we can take back the House and increase our margins in there. Because the other thing is, I mean, it's great we have a good president that's really supportive of labor, but you've got a Congress now that's essentially trying to defund OSHA. I mean, the House budget, the proposed House budget, called for a 15% cut in OSHA's budget. I mean, OSHA is already an incredibly small, understaffed, under-resourced agencies, and to think that they would propose to cut that further by 15% is just incredible. It would be disastrous.
But I listened to my Republican friends, Jordan, and they're telling me that it's those rogue agencies like OSHA who's job killers, Jordan.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the problem is, the Republican budgets are worker killers. There's no evidence that OSHA kills jobs or regulations kill jobs. In fact, to the contrary, because regulations actually, make businesses run more efficiently and more safely,
and save lives. I think we're headed in a good direction, the right direction. I give this administration credit for at least going that. Anything that you would change, anything that you would do in addition to this to help make this better? And with all your years of expertise, there's got to be something.
Yeah, well, there's a lot. Again, as I said, the Occupational Safety and Health Act is 50 years old. It was, built for an era where there were unions. It really needs rewriting and revamping, and it can take 10 or 20 years to issue an OSHA standard these days. That's just unacceptable and not at all what was intended when the law was passed. Congress can pass laws that direct OSHA to issue standards much faster, but obviously that's not going to happen when we have Republican majorities in either House of Congress, or God forbid a Republican president. So there is a lot Congress can do, if we have big enough majorities, and obviously have to deal with the filibuster in the Senate. funding being the first one, but also just changing the law. And there have been proposals to change the law in a number of different areas that would make OSHA much more effective and protect more workers much better.
Again, these are the issues that we should be voting on. I don't care who wears a dress. I don't care who does what who in their bedroom. This is the stuff we should be voting on. At least that's my thoughts. But Jordan, I appreciate you taking some time for us. Always great having you on.
All right, you're welcome. Anytime.
Our good friend Jordan Barrett. Make sure you check out his website, jordanbarrett.com/confined space. We'll get links out on social media. You can take a look at that. We'll take a quick break. Right back with your thoughts. Stick around.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1996. That was the day the workers at the Lusty Lady Strip Club in San Francisco made their final push to make their case for the right to join a union. They made history by winning the union vote 57-15. SEIU Local 790 led the historic campaign. What started the union drive was the windows at the private booths where the ladies performed. The windows had one-way glass. That meant patrons could look in, but performers could not see out. They worried that the men could videotape them or take photographs without their permission. When management refused to change the windows, the women started talking union. Soon, other workplace issues arose as the women furthered their union discussion. One woman recalled, "We started to discuss other problems at work, like being forced to come in when you were sick." She went on, "Our first thought was to organize a petition, but we were really concerned about individual dancers being scapegoated and fired because that happened on a regular basis." Another participant in the union drew on her personal background as a reason for getting involved. She noted, "I had been raised to support union efforts and the workers' cause. I hadn't ever worked at a place where there was any sort of struggle to be a part of." The women ran a successful campaign to unionize. Despite winning the vote, management dragged its feet in negotiating their first contract. The women went on strike, and management locked them out. Few men dared to cross the picket line to enter the club, and within a few days, management capitulated and returned to the bargaining table where the women signed their first contract. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. Interesting article over at the Washington Post. And, this is one of those file under the dumbing down of America. I've talked years about the whole schooling movement. And my position has always been homeschooling is child abuse. It's that simple in my view. Because you're handcuffing your children into your narrow-minded viewpoints. And look, most of the people I know who do the homeschooling stuff, it's about religion or it's about their narrow-minded ideology, generally religion. So am I surprised that the very well-to-do person that they pointed out in this article, who's the guy behind this recent massive push towards homeschooling, is a guy who's an old blast from the past, and they point out this guy Michael Ferris, who is a conservative Christian lawyer, who made his name suing, for homeschooling back in the 80s, and even worse, for years was just kind of a fringe character, and the whole homeschooling thing was kind of a fringe thing. And, when the TV show with the 18, 19, 50 and counting, whatever it is, that kind of brought to the forefront this push. And I've been saying for years what the Christian community wants, the Quiverful movement in particular, what they want is they want to be able to pump out as many kids as they can, like the 19 and 20 or 20 and counting kid people, and then homeschool them and have the government pay them. And I've said that's always been the goal. It's always been the goal to make education dollars portable, put it in a backpack wherever the kids go, it goes with them. And everyone say, well, it's about charter schools, it's about magnet, it's about all this other stuff. I've said, no, it's never been about that. It's always been about cashing in on the taxpayer's back for these groups. Well, what this Washington Post article has pointed out is, yeah, congratulations. This guy, on a call of a bunch of rich, crazy right-wing conservatives, made the pitch. Time to take down public education. Time to push them on, it's about race. It's about gender. It's about all these things other than what it actually is. And look, they've been masterful at pitching this idea that public education harms your kids, and that parents are somehow, divinely entitled, divinely empowered to be the great educators. Now, what's interesting to me is most of the people I know who do the homeschooling barely got out of high school themselves. So to put the next generation's mind, their ability to learn and think critically in the hands of people who could barely get through a system themselves, not good for a country. And I think it leads us to the point that we're at in a lot of spaces where you've got this confirmation bias, where if you don't believe what I believe, absolutely, well, you can thank the Supreme Court, a decision that gave parental rights groups the ability to claim billions of dollars in tax dollars for private education and homeschooling. This is going to get bigger. But this article, talks about, the push behind this and the issues that they're pushing. Critical race theory didn't just come out of nowhere. There was a moneyed group who said, hey, let's message this. They organized parents to get all riled up and to fear people into action, because nothing motivates like scaring the heck out of people. They're coming for your children, which is why all these Q-kooks are on the, we've got to stop child trafficking. And how are we going to do that? We're going to go on Facebook and we're going to post mean things about Joe Biden. That's going to stop it. Or we're going to buy a ticket to a stupid movie. Oh yeah, that's going to stop it. How about using government, law enforcement? How about, no, can't do that. And this is because it's not about doing anything. It's about causing the anger. And this is where I started today. It's about causing that outrage. It's about causing people to get so irrationally angry that nothing gets done and that you just destroy things. And this guy, this Ferris guy, basically came out and said, look, it's time to take down the education system as we know it. Destroy public education. You can make it a commodity, so you can charge those poor people. And hey, if they can't afford it, we always need hand laborers. It's really kind of a scary thing. And his pitch has always been, public schools are indoctrinating children. Godless. And look, you go back to the Reagan years. We've been having this prayer in school argument for years. And look, I'm not against people praying. I think there are a lot worse things you can do. But I grew up believing that you did that in private. You didn't stand up in the middle of a restaurant and make a scene. You didn't go out in front of the flagpole and have a whole bunch of people standing around and causing a scene. All of this stuff is about creating tension. All of this stuff is about creating division and using the thing that's supposed to help us be better, that makes us want for a higher calling, to actually make us work. It's masterful. It's incredible what they've done. And I sometimes am in awe at how effective they are at tearing us apart. But I'm also distraught at how easily we allow it. But I do want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you miss any portion of the program, grab the podcast. Wherever you find your favorite podcast, you'll find ours. But this is a big one. I'm curious on this. You in favor putting money in a backpack so homeschooling can now be a profit motive? Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.